So thank you all for being here today. I know that many of you are likely tired of this topic and the frequency with which it comes up in secular spaces. But I think most of you also recognize that it does so because the stakes are really high right now. So I do genuinely appreciate your time while we have it. I am here to talk to you guys about the problem of transphobia within the secular movement. And while I will be naming some names, calling out some specific people and some specific behaviors that I think should be concerning to all of us, this isn't about slinging mud to me or canceling anyone or branding them with a scarlet T. That is not my goal. I have appreciated and respected the work of the men I'm going to be talking about today, and I know all of you do too. If you don't know me, my name is Arden Hart. I am the head of production at The Line, the leading network for skeptic atheist call-in shows on YouTube. I've been a trans activist for many years now. I've been involved in protests and counter-protests, both in organizing and as a participant. I've hosted my own call-in show, Transatlantic, for over 4 years, where my co-hosts and I, who are all also trans, take calls from the public on this matter. To me, as someone deeply embedded in these spaces, talking to actual activists across the globe every day, calling someone or something transphobic isn't about accusing someone of a thought crime that they have to atone for. It's not an insult, at least in and of itself, meant to deride or demean. Now, if you call my show and I call you a stupid transphobe, that was me trying to deride or demean you. But if I say what you've said is transphobic, or your pattern of behavior consistently demonstrates that you're a transphobe, or you have an anti-trans bias, I am not trying to attack you. I am trying to open a door to help you reflect on how your words and your actions and your beliefs might be harming one of the most marginalized communities in the US right now. Obviously, we are far from the only one, and I'm not here to play the oppression Olympics. And listen, I know this community values good, robust debate of ideas, and I do too. It's tempting when Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins claim to be just asking questions to assume that they are simply engaging in that honest, skeptical back and forth. But we don't live in a vacuum, and words have consequences, especially for people as influential as the ones we're talking about today. And furthermore, the statements we're going to go through show a fundamental misunderstanding of what actual trans people are actually asking for, which is, in summary, the most basic of human rights. Freedom from discrimination at our place of education, employment, and in housing, dignity and equal access to society, not having to manage our day around a pee schedule because someone might be uncomfortable with us in a bathroom. Worse, in the case of Dawkins, he has repeatedly platformed some of the most blatantly malicious and hateful voices out there. Like Helen Joyce, one of the first guests on his newest podcast, who has said that trans people are a huge problem to a sane world and that we need to reduce the amount of trans people. Now, I don't know how you go about reducing the amount of trans people that is functionally different from either conversion therapy or genocide, but I'd like to think we can all agree that that's a pretty abhorrent statement. He's also recommended the book Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier, a book whose central premise was based on a paper that was retracted by its own publisher for its poor sampling methods, including contacting parents on a forum specifically designed for parents who are upset about their kids being trans. And again, this is not an attempt to erase the meaning you may have found in their earlier work. I believe all of them have contributed important ideas and credibility to skeptics and atheists such that we can organize for events like the one we're all at today. But you need to understand the stakes in the moment we're in. Last thought before we dive into the meat and potatoes of this talk, addressing some specific categories of anti-trans claims that are really common. I want to be clear that I don't expect you guys to retain every counter-argument. I'm going through them so that you know they exist. And I don't expect you guys to pick up a sword and become a trans activist yourself. I mean, it would be great. We really need your help out there, but that's not the point. I am hoping that in making this case that we can realign our priorities. Because if you were to ask me, the erosion of our right to due process is the most terrifying thing that is on the docket. But this topic is constantly in the news and in the mouths of these people, and so it needs to be addressed. Moreover, I hope I can convince you that the relentless assault on trans rights does nothing for robust debate or truth or skepticism. It does nothing for Enlightenment values or humanism or Western society, whatever that means. What it does is cede ground completely, in many cases, to the very people who want to see women in America stripped of the ability to make decisions about their own body. And once we start selling off our freedoms where it's convenient, do you think they'll stop there when they've tested the waters and felt that it's fine? It will be women, cisgender women, biological women, whatever you want to call them, who in many cases bear the brunt of transphobia for not looking womanly enough. Oh, there's supposed to be a... Oh, there we go. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Here's a few examples of some news stories where women were accused of being trans and caught flack over it, pulled out of attacked in the case of the New York City woman here, and fired from Walmart for failing to report appropriately that she was accused of being a trans woman in a bathroom when she was not trans. It's going to be women, cisgender women, who lose scholarships and medals, not because a trans person beat them, but because they naturally had a slightly higher testosterone level due to a difference of sexual development, like in the case of Nagesa and Semenya here. The anti-trans movement is a Christian, I went a little too fast, sorry. The anti-trans movement is a Christian nationalist one to its core. It seeks to frame men as inherently stronger and superior, to control women's expressions and freedoms, and to define us by a chemical reaction at the time of conception. And right now, people are dying. Trans people are dying. Trans women of color are being murdered by their partners. Trans people are being imprisoned for washing their hands in a women's restroom. Legal residents are being deported to El Salvador without due process, and women are being arrested and fined for miscarriages. There is no time for fractures in our coalition because you find us inconvenient. You and everyone you know have immeasurably more in common with the most disadvantaged trans person than you could ever have with the billionaires and Christian nationalists who are in charge. So our first category is going to be on the claim that sex is binary. So I have a few quotes here from Richard Dawkins and Jerry Coyne. The top one says, "Race is a spectrum, but sex is pretty damn binary." Jerry Coyne says that under this definition of sex, nearly all individuals fit into a biological sex category. So I chose these quotes to start us off because I find them kind of funny. You see, the matter of whether or not sex is a binary is itself a true binary. Either it is or it isn't. There are only two options. To say that something is pretty damn binary or nearly binary exposes that it is not, in fact, a true binary. This is what's called bimodal, a data set where the majority of points occur at two locations, but not exclusively. Trans people, trans activists, and the trans-inclusive understanding of biological sex is not confused about the near 99% trend with which people tend to be sorted into these biological categories, nor does it deny the utility of these categories in things like research. Our model both captures the full scope of biology and makes room for the fact that some people don't fit neatly into one category or the other, and that humans, a social species, might, as a result of these exceptions, reject the expectations put upon them. So Dawkins initially made this claim with regard to chromosomes, but this argument has some really obvious flaws, like the fact that there are numerous examples of human beings who are, at the very least socially, uncontroversially, men and women, who lived their whole lives with the standard phenotype and social roles of men and women, and then later found out that their chromosomes were different. That's the case of, on the bottom there, the XY woman who ended up having 2 unassisted pregnancies and did not know she was XY until her daughter's karyotype was done. And there are XX men, like on the top, who have perfectly standard phenotypes of their genitals. So, even under the model that Richard Dawkins put forth, where the Y chromosome makes the man and the absence of one makes the woman, you still have women with penises and men getting pregnant. So the argument usually gets pushed back. Now they'll say, well, there's only 2 gamete types. That is the sperm, or the small mobile gamete, or the egg, the large immobile gamete. And this is usually how we determine the sex of a newly discovered species. It has a great deal of utility. But Coyne goes on to say, later in the quote that I shared in the last slide, that no individual makes gametes other than sperm or eggs, and no individual makes more than one of these, but fails to acknowledge that some people have the organs with which to remove those said gametes, or have the organs with which to produce the said gametes removed. Do people suddenly lose their sex when they have a hysterectomy or a vasectomy? That's clearly not the case, right? So the goalposts get moved again. This is an article from Jerry Coyne and Luana Maroja where they say males are those with bodies designed to make sperm and females are those with bodies designed to make eggs. Kathleen Stock, another notorious career anti-trans activist on Dawkins' podcast, said, "A female is any biological entity in a sexually dimorphic species that's on a developmental pathway toward the production of large gametes. Designed and on a pathway." So now we're not talking about what you are, or even describing what our bodies do. We're talking about what it's supposed to do, what it would have done should the circumstances have been different. Had the path not been derailed? This argument is not biology. This is prophecy. It's an assertion that there is some true essence of maleness and femaleness remaining even after every other identifiable feature that you say is necessary is proven to be insufficient. We can say that about literally anything. Had the universe been slightly different, humans would have had tails like our ancestors. But we live in this reality where biology sometimes doesn't go the way we expect it to. Now, the final position of the goalpost seemed to be that exceptions don't count. Jerry Coyne in this article says that, but genuine intersexes don't challenge the statement that sex is binary. They aren't classifiable as male or female, but nor do they constitute a third sex. But what's necessary to disprove the sex binary is not to prove that there's a third sex category, but simply to show that there are more than two possible options. And there are many more. You don't just get to toss out the exceptions to a universal statement you made because it's inconvenient to your argument. When you're in law or philosophy and you're making these sort of universal statements, we'll often do what's called testing the limiting principle. We're looking on the edge cases to see if that is actually a truly universal rule, or if it's just a statistical trend. So imagine, if you will, you're checking into a hotel. You go up to the clerk and the person behind the counter says, "Just so you know, all the rooms in this hotel are locked." You might be like, "Well, that's really weird that you went out of your way to explain that." So let's say you go around and testing all the doors, and after testing all 100 doors in the hotel, you find that 2 are unlocked. You go back to them and you say, "Hey, you lied. There were 2 open doors. I walked in on people." And they go, whoa, but the exceptions don't break the rule. 98% of them are still that way. And, all of our fire alarms work. Are you gonna trust them? Are you staying in that hotel? Because here's the truth of it. If every time your definition of binary gets challenged, you move the goalpost to protect the status of binary, you aren't seeking truth. You aren't defending a fact, you're defending a narrative. A very political narrative that serves to essentialize individual humans down to our reproductive capacity as a species. This is called the ecological fallacy, or the fallacy of division, that suggests that traits which are true of populations must necessarily be true of individuals within those populations. In putting aside the problem of whether or not a trans woman or a trans man is in fact a man or woman, what is the point of this conversation? Because it gets you views on YouTube? What power do you think we as trans people have that we are going to completely restructure biology and reality? It would seem to me that with such an influential and massive platform between these three, that there could be a much better use of their time. So section 2. Transness is a cult or a trend or a religion. So I have a handful of quotes here for you from Sam Harris on one of his recent podcasts following the election. Many Americans reject the new metaphysics and even the new biology mandated by trans activists in the institutions they have successfully bullied and captured. There now seem to be countless examples of where the possibility of social contagion is obvious, where due to the success of trans activists in changing institutions, these kids are effectively in a cult, being brainwashed by a new orthodoxy. To say that they're women and any distinction between them and biological women for any purpose is a thought crime and an act of bigotry. That's the precept of a new religion. Ah yes, the big, mean trans person with enough power to make entire institutions tremble at the knee and rewrite biology. If trans people are so powerful, why is it that 78% of trans people in a 2015 survey with 30,000 trans respondents want hormones, but only 49% receive them? If we're so powerful, why is it that 49% of those same respondents don't have IDs with the name or gender marker they were preferred? It's a real shit job we're doing with all this power we supposedly have. But furthermore, who exactly, I would love to know, is enforcing these alleged thought crimes? I actually appreciate one thing all of them have said, which is that while they may not understand or agree with every element of trans rights, that they would use the names and pronouns of a trans person if they requested it because it's a matter of politeness. While, of course, trans people want those in our lives to see us for who we are, I have no claim to divine punishment for you not thinking I'm a woman. But of course, I'm not going to be comfortable with you or inclined to friendship with you if you don't value me the way my friends who see me as a woman actually value me. But this claim of trans as a religion comes up quite frequently on my show, Takis. The core of this claim seems to be the notion that when someone identifies as trans, since you have no access to the contents of their minds to prove it, the proclamation is tantamount to a spell or invocation or a claim of a relationship with God. It's well suited to an audience of atheists who already are predisposed to reject anything they perceive as religious, whether or not it actually is. This analogy, though, I think falls apart pretty quickly when you look closer. When someone makes a claim about a relationship with God, they're making a claim about external reality. They're asserting not just that a God exists, but that he can communicate with them. And in the minds of many Americans, he has a lot of opinions on what kinds of sex you can have and with whom, what clothes you can wear, what foods you can eat, endorses slavery and commits genocide and threatens us all with eternal damnation for disbelief. It has implications for every person who exists and will ever exist. However, when a trans person says they're a woman or a man or non-binary, they're not making a claim about some fundamental component of reality. It's a claim about their perception of their internal experience and sense of identity. They aren't rewriting everything you know about biology. They are just exposing that the biological essentialist model is insufficient to account for everyone's experience. If this brand of supposed skepticism were consistently applied, you would be the most unbearable person to talk to. Imagine if every time your friend mentioned their internal state, like, I'm gay, or I'm hungry, or I'm in pain, you demanded external proof lest they be accused of a New Age religion. Oh, you're in pain? Let me shove my fingers into your open wound and see how much you squeal. Oh, you're hungry? Eat this entire pizza right now. Oh, you're gay? Kiss every man in this room right now. Clearly, that's absurd. We rely on people's honest reporting of their internal states every single day without calling it a religion. Doctors rely on honest self-report to be able to do clinical diagnostics with things like pain. When you went to the emergency room and saw that little smiley face scale, did you think that was some sort of objective test? Or was that a subjective measure you were reporting? Demanding external proof of a completely subjective internal experience doesn't make you skeptical, especially not when you're not applying it universally. It just makes you annoying. But this skepticism is tied to a hypothetical fear that I want to explore taking seriously for a second. Maybe someone is lying about their gender identity to do harm to someone else. Forget that transitioning is unequivocally the most inefficient way to go about predating on somebody. If somebody lies about anything to commit harm, like sexual assault, they should face the full consequences for their actions. But what you're mad about isn't trans people, it's the ineffectiveness in our systems of power to do anything about sexual assault. You are mad about rape culture. But this also demands that you can now suddenly read the mind of this potential fake trans person for a motivation when your entire stipulation was that you can't in fact read their mind. So another claim in this domain about trans being a religion is to cite the drastic uptick in people identifying as trans in the last 10 years. There's a number of different sources this comes from, but it's all from the UK. And while I don't think our boys dig into this one as much, it's in the similar domain. A lot of their peers use this, so I did want to address it. You'll hear about the 4,000% uptick in referrals to gender clinics between some point in the early 2000s and the mid-2010s in the UK. When you hear stats like this, it can be really shocking, because surely that's a lot, right? Well, not so much when you look at the base rate of where we're starting from. If I started a YouTube channel today and told one person, and that person subscribed, and I came back next year and told you I had a 4,000% increase in subscribers over the year, you might be like, damn, she's really making moves, until you saw that I had 41 subscribers. This 4,000% claim seems to be from about 50-ish in the pre-2010s to around 5,000 in like the late 2010s. And the population of minors in the UK is about 17 million, meaning that this represents about 0.02% of the youth population there. But again, let's grant them the entire position and see if the conclusion makes sense. So, do mass numbers of people gathering over shared experiences constitute a cult? Does an upswell in a movement constitute a cult? Over at The Line, the network where I do call-in shows, we have several thousand live viewers on our flagship show every week. Hundreds of thousands over a week and several million in a month. Are we now a cult? How many times have we as atheists been accused of forming a new religion or cult because we like to congregate with people who understand us? That is simply the human condition. There is no divine trans edict, and that's why, like atheists, we do skew leftist and progressive in our politics, but that's more about what party is invested in protecting our rights, not our shared beliefs necessarily on every individual issue. There's consistently lots of disagreement in the trans community because we are a diverse group of people who share only this one fact of our birth. Trans people, as a community, aren't invoking supernatural or divine insight into our gender. Though some might feel it's a spiritual experience, I don't personally. I think we are our brains, and so any element of our identity has to be explained by a brain state. But we know trans identities exist. Even Sam, Dawkins, and Coyne will admit this, even if I think their standards of who seems to count are unreasonable. In short, labeling trans identities as a religion is not just logically inconsistent, it's dismissive of legitimate social concerns, unhelpful in resolving real-world issues like sexual assault. It's not an actual argument with true premises or a conclusion or evidence of harms of the trans movement. It's a shortcut to dismissing the well-being of an entire group of people by appealing to the sphere of a Jonestown cult level of manipulation for which there is simply no evidence. And even if some portion of the trans community could be described as a cult, is this really the cult we're concerned about right now? Trump's FCC chair, thank you. Trump's head of the FCC was recently seen sporting a gold Trump head pin. His supporters will readily tell you, we need a dictator, when seemingly the only negative side effect of the trans cult is adults reliving our missed years through cringy knee-high socks and colorful hair. I'm sorry, but I'm personally more concerned with the cult trying to establish a fucking dictator in the United States of America. This section is about trans inclusion in sports and spaces. So all three, Dawkins, Harris, and Coyne, have firmly planted their flags on this hill. Sam says that Americans aren't really into seeing biological men punch women in the face at the Olympics. A claim loaded with language meant to evoke a very particular image, and one for which he has no good evidence. The evidence for the claim that Aman Khalif is a transgender person is dubious at best, one coming from a Russian boxing federation with a vested interest in preserving a record of one of their athletes. And the evidence to the contrary includes the woman who resigned in the fight saying it had nothing to do with her thinking that Khalif was a man. Or Dawkins, who has discussed how our biological sex causes us to tower over female competitors and break their swimming records. While it's true that males tend to be, on average, taller than females, I went through male puberty and I'm certainly taller than the average woman, that's not a universal truth. Furthermore, there is no evidence of an epidemic of breaking records. Leah Thomas, who he references, did win one race, but is most known for the one where she tied for 5th place with Riley Gaines, who is now flown around by the Heritage Foundation to tell people how her white innocence was taken by the evil man who destroyed her career and that transgenderism is a pedophile cult. I also have some of the swimming records of Leah Thomas here. You can see that in a number of these, she came in 8th, 4th, 5th, and a couple of first-place races. Heaven forbid trans people win something. So continuing on, in 20 years of the Olympic Committee allowing trans athletes to compete, only one trans athlete, openly trans athlete, has ever qualified, and that was Laurel Hubbard at the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. But they don't talk about her, because she didn't even win a medal, she didn't even qualify, she came in 11th place, and had a few of her lifts disqualified because she did some sort of error. I don't know, I don't do sports, okay? I did want to touch on this claim and make you guys aware that it exists, but I did not have time to dig into the full depth of it. John Oliver recently did a great debunking on one of his specials. Go John Oliver. But this has to do with this notion that biological males have stolen over 900 medals from girls. There's so many problems with this without even getting into the specific problems with the source of where they get this information from. You would have to ask yourself, how many medals is 900 medals of those that are given to people across the globe, across every sport throughout the year? Sounds like a lot, but again, when you're looking at the base rates, these things are actually not nearly as impressive as they want you to think. That's why they leave out the context. But moreover, taking over women's sports is such a ridiculous goal. To what end? For what accolades? These people don't give a fuck about female athletes. I doubt any of them. I doubt any of them could name any of the top female athletes in any NCAA sport right now. Is it because we're gonna get money? Female athletes notoriously make much less than their male competitors. And all of these things are, of course, taking the argument seriously as it pertains to professional athletes, but it ignores the fact that most of the laws being drafted to stop this affect children, who in multiple cases, you could count on one hand the amount of trans people that affects in a given state. This stops them from being able to interact with the few peers who don't hate them, and this is where we're spending our time. According to the Olympic Charter itself, Fundamental Principle 4, the practice of sport is a human right. Every individual must have access to the practice of sport without discrimination of any kind, and in respect to internationally recognized human rights within the remit of the Olympic movement. It bears repeating here also that the trans-inclusive models of sex, again, don't deny general trends. Like that, people who are born male and go through male puberty tend to, on average, have advantages in certain domains of sport. But the evidence for how this pertains to trans people and trans women in particular, since that is realistically what most of these people are concerned with, is still very much inconclusive. And again, this is making assumptions about individuals based on trends in populations, and the solutions they're proposing are blanket bans. Is that the right thing? Nope, that is not there yet. Sorry, wrong slide. But turning briefly to other women's spaces, prisons, bathrooms, and shelters, the panic there is usually an echo of the one we discussed earlier, an assertion that because men are more sexually violent on average, that trans women will be as well. This is, again, a problem with rape culture in America, not trans people. This is a problem with a culture that venerates religious leaders who time and time again use their power over children to prey upon them. This is a problem with a culture that will elect a president credibly accused of sexual assault, held liable in court for the assault of a woman, but expects trans people to be responsible for the hypothetical rapes we might cause in the future. And we could talk about the data that seem to show that trans people are more likely to be victims of violence, especially in states with restrictive gender laws, but we don't need to, because this biological essentialist framework has repeatedly failed at its stated goals of protecting women and ensuring fairness. Instead, it serves as a political shield to defend the actual perpetrators of violence and the actual people degrading the rights and protections of women. It is the basis on which they construct laws that restrict all of our bodies and freedoms. Every day, church leaders, community leaders, politicians, and the like are credibly accused of sexual assault. And rather than even address that, we're here talking about, again, the hypothetical potential predators. We are concerned allegedly about a man who might have an easier time in a woman's prison because, that's apparently just a weekly crochet meetup, rather than talking about the epidemic of prison guards raping women in prison. Grow up. There are real problems, and you are ruining people's lives over this stuff. Section 4, trans kids in healthcare. There we go. So, trans kids are not being rushed into transition at any stage. Young lesbians are not being turned into boys because they played with trucks, and gay boys are not being turned into women because they liked the Spice Girls a little too hard. To address this claim of mass mutilation of kids, the Journal of the American Medical Association recently released 2 studies, both in June of last year and February of this year, using a healthcare database of insurance claims to evaluate how frequently these treatments are being done. So these people arguably have the highest degree of access to transition care, right? Anyone who's not accounted for by this would be paying out of pocket, so that number would almost certainly be smaller than the ones we're seeing here. And it's already vanishingly small. The study found that in a sample of over 5 million adolescents between 2018 and 2022, the rate of receiving puberty blockers was 0.02% for assigned female patients and 0.01% for assigned male patients. In a sample with 22 million adolescents, the rate of undergoing a gender-affirming surgery with a gender diagnosis before you turned 18 was 0.005% for minors aged 15 to 17 and 0.0001% for people 13 to 14 years old. 0 procedures were found under the age of 12. And when the study included minors without a transgender diagnosis, they found 151 gender-affirming surgeries on minors. 146 of them were gynecomastia breast reduction surgeries for cisgender males, meaning 6 cases of trans minors between June of 2023 and June of 2024 had surgery. Any trans person can tell you each surgeon has their own requirements, most of which are informed by WPATH guidelines that require us to be on hormones for multiple years before we even can get surgery, and even then, we still usually need a letter of recommendation from both a counselor and a doctor, and that's for adults, meaning these kids had to have been cases where one of 3 things happened. The doctor was negligent, the parents lied, or the likely option, they had extenuating circumstances that warranted an accelerated timeline. I don't know these families or these kids to be able to make that judgment, and you don't either. Now we need to talk about the Cass Review out of the UK, which was a literature review commissioned by the UK government to evaluate the quality of evidence for youth access to hormones and puberty blockers. I have here an executive summary of the Yale response to this. They had a few issues with it. They are making statements that are consistent with models of gender-affirming care, like they're recommending, we need to do this. These are things we already do. They're failing to contextualize the evidence for gender-affirming care based on other pediatric medicine. They also fail to use well-established guidelines for evaluating the quality of evidence for different studies. And look, when they're able to demonstrate that the risk of trans youth getting healthcare outweighs the risk of them not getting healthcare, I will be totally on board with us encouraging them to wait. Yet, nowhere in the Cass Review did they detail actual harm sustained from this care when used with the appropriate guidelines. There are many appeals to the unknown and the potential for regret and detransition, and yet dismisses much of the evidence to the contrary, including some multi-year longitudinal follow-up studies, because surely all the regret starts just after that point where they started studying. As for regret, several studies have shown the rate of regret to be remarkably small among trans people. It's important to note that regret also goes both ways. For every person who sincerely regrets transition, there are far more trans people who regret the inability to have transitioned sooner. Ask any trans person you know. If you had the knowledge, if you had the family environment to have transitioned early, would you have done it? Most of them will say yes. We have tried treating these people as mentally ill degenerates. Surprise, surprise, doesn't seem to work great. We've tried forcing transition steps and sterilization on them, like in Sweden, for years. Surprise, surprise, people have more regrets when they're forced to get surgeries they don't want. We've tried treating it like a purely social phenomenon, like in the case of John Money and David Raymer, where a child with a botched circumcision underwent a genital surgery as an infant and was raised as a girl. But his gender identity appeared to be innate and persistent, and he eventually took his own life. We've tried therapizing it out of people. Conversion therapy is usually defined as therapy with the goal that the child maintains a heterosexual or cisgender identity. This has been shown time and time again to simply traumatize individuals and fails to remove the actual identity component. While there is certainly more we still need to know about the depth of care needed for trans youth, and we do know a lot, we know more than many other wholly uncontroversial treatments for disorders, I also grabbed here for you guys, there is like a bit of an epidemic in the medical field right now where the quality of evidence for interventions is consistently pretty low. You can see here it's 37% with moderate quality evidence, 31% with low quality evidence, and 21.9% with very low quality evidence. Very similar thing on the other side. Medicine in general has a problem where when you're, especially evaluating populations like children, you can't conduct very high quality double-blind studies because there are massive ethical complications there. This is the only personal note I'll dive into in my story, but I actually started transition at 14. Came out to my mom, And following immense levels of harassment and threats of violence from my peers, rejection from my father, I detransitioned at 17. And I can tell you, at no point was I rushed into transition. At no point was I supported to death, as they like to say, or validated so much for my quirky uniqueness that I just couldn't think for myself. At every point along the way, I was treated like a freak and an outcast and repeatedly questioned, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure?" And then when I detransitioned, I was supported to death and rushed through my detransition. My entire community rallied behind me, and I was suddenly liked again. I even got a superlative in my high school yearbook for thoroughly theatrical. That experience took me years of my life to work through. Also, here's some pictures of my mom and me. Let's see, I'm on the swing, and then that's me with her at her wedding when I was like 12 years old, I think, there. And let me tell you, I was very aware I was trans at that stage. It was an interesting time. But the experience took me years of my life to work through, and years of agony and self-loathing for my complete inability to force myself into a mold that wasn't right for me. I thought that if I didn't give being a man a good, sincere old college try, that I would hate myself for it. But in reality, the only regret I have, the only irreversible damage I sustained, was in crushing down the parts of myself that were trans for so long because society told me that if I let even a wink of it through, I was worth less than dirt. That even if I were the only trans athlete in my entire state, rather than draft legislation and debate on the floor over things that would help the average American, they would go out of their way to make sure that I couldn't interact with the few peers who didn't hate me. And I don't want any kid to have to go through what I went through. I don't want them to be rushed into transition either. I want them to follow strict, evidence-based guidelines that we currently use in the gender-affirming care model, and to have the time and the freedom to figure out exactly what they want out of life. And to know that whatever they should choose to do, that they will have the people in their life to support them and love them through it. Whether they are the most feminine cis man at the end of it, or the most masculine trans woman, or whatever blend they're in. So again, I ask, why are we talking about this? Measles is currently having an outbreak because of anti-vaccine sentiments, many of which are pushed by our current head of the Department of Health and Human Services. There are more confirmed cases of measles right now by orders of magnitude than there are trans athletes. Guns are killing our children in schools in numbers that are truly bone-chilling. Bibles are being put back into schools, the 10 Commandments. But we're here talking about whether happy children who get the rare experience of having an affirming family should be, removed from those homes? Whether the doctor should be imprisoned for giving the best evidence-based care that we know about right now because 1% of 1% might regret? No medicine is perfect. Every medicine has regret. Grow up, stop ruining people's lives. We have real problems. So I know some of that was a little information dense, and I appreciate you all sticking with me through it. There was a lot to cover in this conversation, and we really barely scratched the surface, but much of what we talked about today is applicable in other parts of the conversation. But I want to turn your focus for a second to one final claim, and this one's made by Sam Harris on his recent podcast. This is this notion that it is at least in some major way the fault of trans people that Donald Trump won the recent election. The only real evidence for this, as far as I can tell, is the exit poll where voters indicated that they voted for Trump because Kamala was too focused on cultural issues like transgender issues and not enough on the economy. But it's the MAGA movement who incessantly brings up trans people. Kamala Harris didn't say the word transgender once in her entire campaign. Even when she was on Fox News being litigated over the trans migrant in prison situation, for better or worse, she didn't say the word. But the American people still felt that way, and why is that? I would wager because of the massive multi-million-dollar media campaign employed by Donald Trump and the Heritage Foundation promoting their Project 2025 agenda. Or perhaps it's the influence of Russia Today, the Russian state media network who was found to be paying several conservative influencers who make a lot of anti-trans content millions of dollars. And yet, AOC, who had a massive overlap with Trump voters, has been consistently, vocally pro-trans at every step of the way. And she won by what she calls a fuck you margin. Even in a recent flash poll, pitting her against Schumer for the 2026 primary, she outpaced this longtime incumbent Democrat by 20 points. I know there was another poll also evaluating her for the 2028 primary, and she scored second on that, like way outpacing the third and like 7 points behind Harris. But I think this is all because, as far as I can tell, what the American people care about is the economy. They care about how many hours it's going to take to put food on their table for their families. They care about the schools their children attend and whether or not they'll be safe from gun violence there. They care about how devastatingly expensive our healthcare is, how completely inaccessible housing has become. The enemy you're looking for to explain all these things isn't trans people, it's not immigrants or anti-Christian bias. It's the MAGA movement, and its foundation as a Christian nationalist one bankrolled by our own Dr. Evil, Elon Musk. When we ask, thank you, whether men can be women, a framing not put forth by trans people, by the way, they cheer. They are praying, quite literally, I'm sure, that you let proposed laws to have Bibles in every classroom slip by because you're too tired from all these damn trans debates. They pray that you forget about the proposed laws threatening women with prison time for abortions. They pray that you waste your breath debating whether or not happy kids should have access, to evidence-based healthcare. You see, we don't get to marginalize people and remove rights based on fears, especially not unfounded fears. As humanists, rationalists, as data-driven people, trans people indisputably exist. And we should be allowed to live whatever life we want, regardless of how Elon Musk or Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris feel about it, regardless of whether they think we are really trans. I love the secular community. I love what these thought leaders have done for our community. And nobody here is saying that the ones with transphobic opinions are the worst humans out there and they need to be run out like the lepers. I bet Sam Harris, Dawkins, and Coyne and I probably all agree on the vast majority of policy matters, but they are relying on misinformation on this matter and bigotry and prejudice, and it drives many of you away from people who need your help. We don't need you to become an expert, to memorize all the refutations we went through today. But we do need you to learn enough about what's going on, so when they say they're mutilating kids, you can say, no, that's not happening. We need you to learn enough about what's going on, so when they say trans athletes are destroying women's sports, you can say, no, that's not happening. And when they say this is their hobby horse or pet issue, you should be asking, is this really the best use of your time? The laws that address this help no one and hurt many. We need you to know just enough about this to stand alongside us, because if we are left to stand on our own, we will be exterminated. And while all trans people are asking for at large is basic human rights, we deserve more than just to survive or have dignity. We deserve to succeed, we deserve to win a fucking medal from time to time, and we deserve to have the opportunity to thrive. Thank you.